My husband turned my birthday party into a nightmare by framing me for an organized scheme that carried a serious accusation and decades of prison time. He thought he'd silenced me forever, but he didn't know I was already recording his confession for the internal security check. I thought the worst part of turning 35 would be the fine lines around my eyes, or the sudden, inexplicable realization that my youth was drifting into the rearview mirror. I spent weeks planning this party. The garden was draped in fairy lights, the catering was impeccable, and I was wearing a dress that cost more than my first car. I wanted to feel powerful, loved, and secure. Instead, I stood in the center of our manicured lawn, clutching a glass of vintage champagne that suddenly tasted like vinegar. Mark, my husband of 10 years, clinked his silver spoon against a crystal flute. The sound was sharp, cutting through the laughter of our 50 guests like a razor. Silence fell over the garden. My friends leaned forward, expecting a romantic toast, a declaration of how he couldn't live without me. Mark had always been the golden boy, a successful architect, a charming host, the man who supposedly worshipped the ground I walked on. But as I looked at him under the amber glow of the lanterns, I saw a stranger. His eyes weren't warm. They were cold, calculated, and terrifyingly bright. "I'd like to thank you all for coming to celebrate Elena's birthday," Mark began, his voice smooth and projecting perfectly. "It's a significant milestone, a time for reflection, a time for the truth." A few people chuckled, thinking he was about to tell an embarrassing story about my childhood. My mother, sitting in the front row, beamed at him. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. Mark didn't do jokes. Not like this. He reached into the inner pocket of his blazer and pulled out a thick manila envelope instead of a gift. "For 10 years, I've built a life with this woman," he continued, gesturing toward me with the envelope as if I were a piece of evidence in a courtroom. I gave her everything. This house, the cottage by the lake, my name. But while I was building our future, Elena was busy destroying it. I'm done. I'm not just leaving. I'm taking the house, the cottage, and every cent we have in the joint accounts. And honestly, she's lucky I'm not handing her over to the authorities tonight. The silence that followed was deafening. I felt the blood drain from my face, my knees turning to water. "Mark, what are you talking about? You're scaring everyone," I whispered, trying to reach for his arm. He stepped back, his expression twisting into a sneer of pure disgust. "Don't touch me. I know about the organized scheme, Elena. I know how you've been using my firm's accounts to move money for your friends. I know about the packages with the substance you've been storing in the basement of the cottage. I've seen the logs. I've seen the communication with those radicals you think are so misunderstood." The guests began to whisper, their eyes darting between us. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard it hurt. I didn't understand. Organized scheme? Packages? I was a freelance interior designer. The only thing I moved was furniture and color palettes. "That's a lie," I screamed, the champagne glass shattering on the flagstones at my feet. "I don't know what you're talking about. Mark, this is insane." "Is it?" He reached into the envelope and pulled out a stack of high-resolution photographs. He tossed them onto the table right next to my birthday cake. They were photos of me, or someone who looked exactly like me, meeting a man in a dark parking lot, handing over a heavy bag. There were photos of the cottage basement filled with crates I had never seen before. I've already initiated a serious accusation through my legal team. If you fight me on the property, I'll ensure you face a trial for an attempt to break lives with criminal activity. You'll be looking at decades behind bars, Elena. Sign the papers, walk away with nothing, and maybe, just maybe, I won't tell the internal security check everything I've found. I stared at the photos, my head spinning. I had never been to that parking lot. I had never seen those crates. Before I could even find my voice to scream at him again, the heavy iron gates of our driveway swung open with a mechanical groan. 2 black SUVs roared up the gravel path, their headlights blinding the crowd. Men in dark suits stepped out, moving with a terrifying, synchronized precision. They weren't police. They looked like something much worse. Mark didn't look surprised. He looked like he was waiting for them. One of the men walked straight toward me, pulling a pair of heavy zip ties from his belt. And as the guests began to flee in a panic, Mark leaned into my ear and whispered, "Happy birthday, Elena. I told you I'd make it unforgettable." The world didn't just crumble. It exploded into 1,000 jagged shards of betrayal. The guests, people I had known for years, were scrambling toward the gates like panicked shadows. My mother was being led away by my cousin, her face a mask of horror, looking back at me as if I were a monster she no longer recognized. I tried to scream her name, but the grip on my arms was like iron. The men in the dark suits didn't speak. They didn't read me my rights. They simply marched me toward the house, my heels dragging against the grass I had spent all spring nurturing. Mark followed us, his stride confident, almost predatory. He stopped to pick up a stray party popper from the grass, turning it over in his hand before tossing it aside. "Take her to the study," he commanded. His voice had lost all its warmth, replaced by a clinical coldness that made my skin crawl. Inside my own home, the air felt thin. The familiar scent of vanilla candles and expensive floor wax now felt like the smell of a trap. They shoved me into the leather chair behind Mark's mahogany desk, the chair I usually sat in when we were planning our vacations or discussing our future. Now it felt like an interrogation seat. One of the men stood by the door, his hand resting near his belt, where the outline of an illegal weapon was clearly visible. These weren't the authorities I was used to seeing on the news. There were no badges, no blue lights. There was only a grim, professional silence. "Mark, please," I gasped, my voice cracking. "Whatever you think is happening, it's a mistake. I've never seen those photos. I've never been to that cottage alone in months. You know me." Mark sat on the edge of the desk, looming over me. He opened the manila envelope and spread the contents across the blotter. "I know the Elena I invented in my head," he said, his eyes drilling into mine. "But the real Elena is a shadow. These bank statements, they show hundreds of thousands of dollars moving through an organized scheme linked to your maiden name. This isn't just a few bucks, Elena. This is a massive operation. You've been providing logistics for radicals, people who want to tear down everything we've built. The internal security check has been watching these accounts for months. I only found out because they flagged my firm's involvement." "That's impossible." I lunged for the papers, but the man at the door stepped forward, a warning in his eyes. I scanned the documents. The signatures, my signatures, were perfect. Every loop of the E, every slant of the A. It was my handwriting, but I had never signed these. "You forged these. You're an architect, Mark. You're a master of detail. You did this to get the assets." He laughed, a dry, hollow sound. "To get the assets? Elena, I already have the assets. I'm the one with the clean record. I'm the one the internal security check trusts. I'm the one who uncovered your little game. By tomorrow morning, every news outlet will know that the beautiful Elena was the mastermind behind a network moving prohibited substances and funding criminal activity. You'll be facing a trial for an attempt to break lives with a serious accusation that will put you away for decades." I looked at him, truly looked at him, And for the first time, I saw the cracks in his own story. Mark was too calm, too prepared. He wasn't a victim of a cheating wife. He was a director of a play. My mind raced back to the long nights he spent at the office, the business trips to the border, the sudden influx of cash he claimed was from a private investor. "It's you," I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "The organized scheme, it's not mine. It's yours. You're using me as a shield. You're the one the internal security check is actually looking for, and you're handing them a scapegoat on a silver platter for my 35th birthday." Mark's expression didn't change, but his fingers twitched on the desk. He leaned in closer, so close I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath. "Even if that were true," he hissed, "who are they going to believe? The pillar of the community who turned in his own wife out of a sense of duty, or the woman whose signatures are on every illegal contract from here to the coast?" He stood up and nodded to the man at the door. "Get her out of here. Take her to the cottage. We need to find the rest of the evidence before the official investigators arrive." The man grabbed my shoulder, hauling me toward the back exit. As we passed the hallway mirror, I saw the reflection of the man in the suit. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Mark with a look of pure, subordinate fear. And then I saw it. On the man's wrist was a very specific tattoo, a geometric symbol I had seen once before, tucked away in a hidden folder on Mark's laptop. Suddenly, I realized this wasn't an arrest. These men didn't work for any government agency. They were the very criminals Mark had accused me of consorting with. As they threw me into the back of the SUV, Mark stood on the porch, waving a mock goodbye. "Wait!" I shouted as the door slammed. "Where are you taking me?" The man in the front seat turned around, a cruel smile spreading across his face as he pulled a heavy, unmarked silencer from the glove box. "Mark said you were a quick study, Elena. He's already cleared the cottage for the final act. You're not going to a trial. You're going to be the tragic victim of your own dangerous lifestyle." The engine roared to life, and as we sped away from my beautiful, ruined birthday party, I realized with a jolt of pure terror that the evidence they were going to find at the cottage wasn't just the prohibited substances, it was my body. The SUV bumped over the gravel path of the lake cottage, the tires crunching like bone. Through the tinted glass, I saw the moon reflecting off the black water of the lake, a view I used to find peaceful, now a backdrop for my own execution. The man in the passenger seat checked his illegal weapon one last time, the metallic click sounding like a death knell in the cramped space. He didn't look at me. To him, I was already a ghost, a loose end in a ledger that needed to be balanced. They dragged me out of the vehicle and into the cottage. The interior was exactly as I'd left it. The linen throws over the sofas, the expensive candles I'd bought for our anniversary, the architectural sketches Mark had left on the coffee table. It felt like a museum of a life that had never truly been mine. Mark was already there, pouring himself a glass of wine from the bottle we'd been saving for a special occasion. "The beauty of this place," Mark said, gesturing to the rustic beams, "is its isolation. No neighbors for miles. Perfect for your unfortunate spiral. The internal security check will find the prohibited substances in the floorboards. They'll find your journal, written in your hand, of course, detailing your guilt and your involvement with the organized scheme. It's a tragic story, Elena. The designer who got too greedy and couldn't live with the shame." He stepped closer, his shadow stretching long and monstrous across the room. "You were always too observant. You started asking questions about the firm's offshore accounts. You started looking at the manifests for the cottage deliveries. I couldn't have you digging around where the radicals keep their funding. I felt a surge of cold, sharp clarity. My fear didn't vanish, but it crystallized into a weapon. "You really think you thought of everything, don't you, Mark?" I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "You think you're the only architect in this room?" Mark smirked, raising his glass. "I know I am. You're just the woman who picks out the curtains." "I picked out more than curtains," I hissed. "When we renovated this place last year, I was the one who oversaw the installation of the smart infrastructure. You were too busy with your private investors to notice the specs. I didn't just install a security system, Mark. I installed a complete redundant monitoring network tied to my firm's independent server, not the joint one you've been tampering with." Mark's smile faltered. He glanced at the ceiling, at the small, recessed smoke detector that was glowing with a faint, blue light he hadn't noticed before. "The moment we crossed the property line, the panic protocol triggered," I continued, stepping toward him, ignoring the man with the illegal weapon behind me. "Everything said in this room for the last 10 minutes has been streamed directly to a cloud server. And I didn't just start recording tonight. I've been recording since I found the first discrepancy in the firm's logs 3 weeks ago. I already sent the initial files to a contact I made within the internal security check. I told them if I didn't check in by midnight on my birthday, they should look at the live feed." The man in the suit checked his phone, his face paling. "Boss, the signal. There's an outgoing encrypted burst coming from the house's hardline." Mark's face transformed from arrogant triumph to a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He lunged for me, his hands reaching for my throat, but the sound of the world ending stopped him in his tracks. From the darkness of the surrounding woods, a dozen high-intensity searchlights snapped on, bathing the cottage in a blinding white glare. The windows rattled as a heavy-duty tactical vehicle breached the front gate. "Drop the weapon!" a voice boomed over a megaphone. "Internal security check! Everyone on the ground!" The men Mark had hired didn't hesitate. They knew when they were outmatched. They dropped their gear and hit the floor, their hands behind their heads. But Mark was paralyzed, staring at the blue light of the sensor as if it were the eye of a god he had failed to appease. The door was kicked open, and agents flooded the room. I was pulled away, a thermal blanket wrapped around my shoulders as they tackled Mark to the floor. As they zip-tied his wrists, the lead investigator, a woman I'd spoken to in secret for weeks, walked over to me. "We got it all, Elena," she said, nodding toward the recording device. "The confession, the illegal weapon, the confirmation of the organized scheme. He's going away for a very, very long time. He'll be lucky if he doesn't face a huge term for what we found in those files you sent." I watched as they led Mark out of the house. He looked small. He didn't look like a mastermind or an architect of my destruction. He looked like a coward who had underestimated the woman he thought he owned. 6 months later, I sat on the deck of that same cottage, watching the sunrise over the lake. The house was mine. The cottage was mine. The firm was being liquidated to pay back the victims of Mark's organized scheme, but I didn't care about the money. I had my name back. I had my life back. And as I blew out a single candle on a small cupcake, I realized it was the first time in 10 years I felt truly powerful. Mark had tried to take everything from me on my 35th birthday, but in the end, he only gave me one thing: my freedom.